How are you doing this evening? Hey, you've been in this situation before. Let me ask you, what happens when you know what God's promises are? You know that He's promised good for you, and you know that He's promised He's going to come back, take you, you're going to be with Him forever. But things just don't seem to be working out. What do you do when it looks like God's promises are just falling through the cracks in the floor and aren't working out? I want to talk to you about that this evening. So get yourself relaxed, and when you have the opportunity, I'd like you to open up to the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. The book of Ruth comes right after the book of Judges. Now, you have to understand the context of the book of Ruth. It happens during the time of the Judges. Now, Judges just comes just before the Kings, and the one phrase that characterizes the book of Judges is that everybody was doing what they seemed right, and Israel is in the promised land. They've occupied it. God has given them victory over nearly all of their enemies. Joshua was a really awesome leader as far as all that was concerned. And now Israel's struggling. Some of the judges were good. There were some really outstanding ones like Deborah. And some of them were just really bad, and people were turning away from God. They were falling away. And we have the book of Ruth. And so Ruth is about, the whole premise of the book is about what happens when God's promises just don't seem to be working out. So let's take a look at Ruth, and we're going to take a look at verse 1. We're just going to look at the first paragraph of Ruth and see what it has to show us. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, and his wife and his two sons. Now, the name of the man was Elimelech. Let's get that out of the way in verse 2 there. And the name of his wife, Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. So there's a famine in the land. There's a famine in the promised land. God had promised that there would be all this bounty, and there would be streams and brooks, and that they wouldn't have any need. And all of a sudden, there's a famine. And you can see Elimelech and Ruth, Elimelech and Naomi looking for better land, looking for better times. They hear that things are going really well in Moab. And the thing about Moab is they're descendants of Lot. They're perennial enemies of the Jewish people. And God has told them not to intermarry, not to have anything to do with these people. Well, Elimelech takes his family to Moab. The grass is greener over there, and God doesn't seem to be living up to his promises over in Bethlehem with the famine and everything. So Elimelech makes, in the eyes of any Jew, they would see this as a mistake. He makes a mistake by leaving the promised land, the land where God promised to provide for him, even though it looks like that's not happening, and he goes to Moab. He goes to live with the enemy. So let's see what happens. Picking up in verse 3. But Elimelech, as the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. Well, now that would, again, to a Jew, that would look like judgment of God was falling on Elimelech for taking his family over to Moab. And then verse 4, the two sons took Moabite wives. Now that they have compounded the infraction by taking Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. Now, the whole book of Ruth is about redemption, and Ruth is the main character, but Naomi's really kind of the center of the story. Naomi's left in Moab. Her two sons have died. Her husband's died. For all intents and purposes, they've given up their property back in Bethlehem. And because they didn't have the faith and trust in God that they should have had, even though there was a famine. And so there's nothing in the book that says that God levied his judgment upon them. I'm just saying the Jews would have seen it that way. But whatever promises they did not have fulfilled in Bethlehem, things got much, much worse when they went to Moab. They were supposed to be faithful followers of God, and they just kind of turned their back on God and left. And so we need to be careful that we don't do the same thing. And I'll tell you, here's what Elimelech's biggest problem was. He took things into his own hands. He decided that God wasn't going to do something, so he would do something. Now, I think that's a feeling that many of us can sympathize with. Sometimes it doesn't look like things are going the way we want them to do, so we're going to take control of the situation and steer it and guide it to the effect that we want. We're going to make things happen when we should be trusting in God and resting in him. Now, I love the rest of the story of Ruth. I got the opportunity to preach through it 5 years ago, and it's become one of my favorite books because God redeems Naomi, he redeems Ruth, and Ruth marries Boaz and becomes part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So not only is Ruth redeemed, but she's integrated into the family of God and plays a key part in it. So it's a story, great story of redemption, but it starts out with somebody deciding to take things into their own hands and forsaking the promises of God and going to pursue their own promises. So let that bless you. Let that be a nourishment to you. I love you. I miss you. I'll talk to you tomorrow.